Hello, welcome to this video. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. If you haven't seen these videos before, welcome and welcome back if you have. My intention is unity and oneness, the highest levels of love light. I just wanted to go into a quick, well, we'll see how quick it's going to be, a follow-up to the last video that I did. The previous video that I did, I was a little bit fired up, and I'm still a little fired up. Today's a fiery day for me. And I was just kind of sharing that there's a lot of people that are being triggered right now. There's a lot of things that are triggering us as a humanity, as a collective, as humans, and galactics and hybrids, whatever you want to call us. And it's really showing up for us. Whatever can is. So if we have anything that we're working on or that we haven't necessarily even known that was something that we needed to process, it's coming up. And so I wanted to just give a list of triggers because I recognize that I did not really do that in my last video, even though I said I was going to. And I just wanted to start off really briefly and talk about being in neutral zone. So when we're in a really neutral, calm space and we're in a place of balance and harmony, there can be all kinds of things that happen around us, and yet we're not triggered by them, so to speak. So somebody can say something mean and we recognize that that's their problem. And when I say problem, I say that with love. That's they're triggered by something. Or maybe we triggered something in them. And I didn't talk about that in my last video either. Because oftentimes as light workers, we can actually trigger other people because we're holding space, and that may not be something they're used to being around. And just us being peaceful and being in a place of neutrality can sometimes be a trigger for them. Well, why aren't you upset? Well, why aren't you feeling this? And then that, if we're really in a neutral place, that won't even trigger us. We'll just say, I am that I am. So that is something I wanted to share. And when we're in that place, we find ourselves observing the things that are going on around us as we unfold and create from a heart-centered coherence and a space of neutrality and compassion for what we are experiencing and for what others are experiencing, in recognition that we are all on our own journey, even though we are sharing space, so to speak, on Mother Earth, within Mother Earth, around Mother Earth. And we then allow all of the now to present itself moment to moment in an aware, expansive, expressive, truthful, harmonious engagement with reality, the versions of reality. We then pull in the multidimensional aspect that we are, and when we see things from a multidimensional view, we recognize that all of the things that are unfolding around us are not really us. They are merely a projection. They are not who we are. Let me rephrase that. At the center, at the core, at the heart. They are merely a representation of emotions, things that have been out of balance, realities that are playing out, timelines. They're everything that is part of the realities that we are all playing within. And this is said from non-judgment. I'm not labeling it as good or labeling it as bad. It just is. So we then become aware of the isness that is us. And because of being in that neutral space, that harmonious field, all of the things that unfold around us, we are then able to observe. We are then able to interact with, while creating our own unfoldment from a space of compassion and love, coherence. Now, that doesn't mean as we go through this journey together that we're always going to be in that space. And before I get off of the 0 point neutral space, again, this is not necessarily specific. I'm using words. The words are not necessarily 100% in alignment with somebody else's definition of the words that I'm using. I'm just using them from my own perspective. So we begin to see things from a more expansive space. And we're able to see that just because what's right in front of us looks a certain way, it may not actually be what it looks like. We are also then, I get that picture in my head of the Matrix when Neo pulls the bullet out and recognizes that he doesn't have to dodge the bullets because he's part of the living, breathing fabric that we are all existing in. So, however, I'm taking, and when things come at us, we are then able to process them. So that's embodiment. That for me is one version of what embodiment is. It is embodying ourselves, our higher aspects, which have that broader perspective, which are able to stay in a neutral space that allow the unfoldment of reality from a place of harmonious balance and inner exchange with the divine feminine, the divine masculine, the inner child, left and right brain hemispheres connected, all chakras come into alignment, connection through source into Mother Earth, and expanding out from that space. That to me is embodiment of the higher energies. However, there's a lot going on in the realities that many of us are still choosing to exist within, or to assist in collapsing or dissolving or integrating, any of those labels that we want to put with it. And so many times there are things that come up that trigger us to feel a certain way and then react a certain way. So I want to just talk about some of these triggers. But also, what it does is all of these events that are unfolding allow us to recognize things within ourselves, if we're seeing things from a fairly neutral point, to recognize things within ourselves that maybe need a little bit more integration. And I want to share briefly that integration does not have to be complicated. It can be as simple as us acknowledging that we're feeling a certain way. And just by us giving ourselves permission to feel that way can assist us in integrating whatever it is that has created that feeling within us. We don't have to label it. We do not have to necessarily dig it out and find out why we're feeling that way, although sometimes that is necessary for us to integrate or to process or to digest. But there are many different ways that we can integrate those energies. It isn't just one thing. It doesn't have to be a 3-hour meditation, crying, breath work, and then doing a cleanse. Although sometimes it does have to be that way because that's what works for us. Sometimes it's as simple as us taking it into our hearts and sending it out. Boom, gone, done, move on. Not always. These incoming energies that we are experiencing right now, though, are, from my perspective, giving us an opportunity to do just that. Because everything, boom, is being presented to us on a silver platter. Oh, you want fear? Here it is. You want anger? Here it is. Jealousy, greed, imbalance. It's all right in front of us. And it gives us an opportunity to see. So I had a vision of me standing in the center of a tornado. I actually had this vision years ago. And all around me was, the tornado was cotton candy. And I was standing in this tornado, and all around me was cotton candy, and there was like a cow in part of it, like the old Wizard of Oz, and then there were things in it, and it just stopped, and I was able to literally crawl up this wall of energy, of debris, of cords, of stuff. And I could see things that were highlighted. that were part of my memory, reality, that were symbolic for me. And in that moment, I could see it all like you hit the pause button. And I was able to then acknowledge what I was seeing and do a very quick integration of it. But there was more to it. From my perspective, that's what's being offered to us right now. If we can pause, allow, not judge, and unfold from there. So this is a beautiful opportunity in a very chaotic way sometimes for us to just get it all at once. You want to download, here you go. You want to integrate, here you go. You got a shadow you need to work on, there it is. Bring it up, because we asked for this. Bring it on, we said, and it has been brought, and it's like splat right in our face. May not be exactly how we wanted it to happen, but it's happening. So that's my perspective of just being in that 0 point neutral space. I talked a lot in my last video about fake it till you make it and little cheats. Guys, if you do something and it allows you to shift your frequency and vibration, from my perspective, it isn't cheating. It isn't faking it. It becomes real, because then all of a sudden we go, well, I didn't feel good before. I said, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. And for some strange reason, I feel a little bit better. Then that worked. It may not have pulled me all the way back into 0 point, but it moved me up on the ladder from being really angry to now just being a little angry, for example. And that leads me into acknowledgement. I talked briefly about that. It's important to acknowledge our feelings, B, acknowledge where we're at in the process. If we don't know and we keep saying, bring it on, bring it on, bring it on, yet we haven't integrated, digested, or processed what we've been given and it's all in our lap, there does come a point sometimes where we do need to do that 2-hour meditation, that week-long retreat, because we already have compost that's just sitting there waiting to digest, and some of them might be really big, and we may then, again, I get the word that comes through is hoarding, right? We don't need to hoard all of that stuff. Let's digest it. Let's process it. It might take a little longer. It might not take any time at all. And time, of course, is a relative. Okay, so we're being triggered often, and it's okay. Something might come up in my tornado and I might go, ooh, that just hurt my feelings. Acknowledge, digest it. How do I feel about that? I'm actually okay with it. It's not that big of a deal. I talked a lot about, but that's in somewhat of a neutral place. I just acknowledged, felt it. Maybe I got a little sad, maybe I got a little angry, but then by me doing what I needed to do, which I'll do a separate video on integration, I'm then able to process it and get back into a place of somewhat neutrality. Being in a complete neutral space may not always be accessible for us in that moment, or better spoken, may not feel like it's accessible in any given moment. However, it is always there if we can get to it. But it's sometimes just getting, again, that one rung up the ladder. It's getting out of severe depression and allowing ourselves to feel everything rather than ignoring them. That's the worst thing we can do, and put it under the rug and be afraid of it. Facing our fears, facing what's in front of us, so that we can then have a good cry, have a conversation that might bring us into a higher frequency. It's always being in, and part of neutrality is about being present. Because if someone hurts our feelings, and then we go into the past, they hurt our feelings before, and then they did that to us before, and I'm so angry, and I'm so mad at this person. Well, that's telling me that A, the memories are now triggering. They triggered a memory that triggered a feeling that they've triggered before. Maybe they're a blessing for me to recognize within myself that I need to speak my truth when somebody is saying something to me that isn't do no harm. If they're saying things to me that they have no business saying, well, that's their business really, because that's on them. I can choose to extract myself from the situation and say, I choose not to feed you energy. I choose to extract myself from the situation. That's been a key word of mine this week. And say, no, thank you. And just by us, maybe that was what the triggers were for. Remember to speak your truth. You know, I really appreciate that you feel that way, or I don't appreciate that you feel that way, but that's your opinion. Your opinion is none of my business. Have a nice day. Walk away. Be done. It's okay to extract ourselves from a situation if it's constantly making us feel or constantly triggering something that makes us feel unworthy. Now, granted, that unworthiness that we're feeling may have nothing to do with them. They may be triggering that feeling. Now, I'm using two different examples here. If somebody's being rude and putting us down, which then makes us feel unworthy, that's different. That's when we extract ourselves, we speak our truth and say, no, thank you, have a nice day, move on. That's where I'm saying that trigger is a lesson for us to stand up and speak our truth in our sovereignty. But if we keep going back, then that goes a little deeper perhaps. And we realize that feeling of unworthiness is maybe something that we've become accustomed to, and that's on us. So process, integrate, extract ourselves from the situation. There's lots of different layers. It's like an onion. Okay. So there's so much I could go on and on. Those were some examples of some triggers. So the biggest message is, again, getting into neutral. So how do we do that? Well, a lot of the examples I've used in this video and the last video, but it is about us. It is about us and self-care. Self-care, not selfishness. Self-care is not selfishness, first of all. Many of us are focused on, I talked a lot about how can we be of service to others if we're not even in service to ourselves, what we need. But I wanted to go further into that. It isn't about us being in service to others. And I know that's sometimes like, what? I came here to help everybody else. Maybe that's your truth. Maybe that's what you feel is your reality. But it doesn't matter if we are the creators. If everything around us and we're taking care of everybody else, and then we get sick and end up in the hospital, that basically is saying that we don't care about us, we care more for them. We cannot then hold the frequency because now we're down in a lower frequency, and all of those people that we cared about helping now have to come help us. And that's okay. Again, this is non-judgment, because maybe that's part of what we agreed to do, or maybe that's something that we all are participating in to learn or to experience a certain experience. However, I'm reining it in around the concept that we are service to others. Okay, but we have to be in our own neutrality, because then we might be trying to help someone else, yet they might be triggering the crap out of us. We're like, how can I help you? But really, it isn't about that. They're triggering us so that we can work through our own feelings of lack or unworthiness or whatever it is, right? So once we have integrated those, I talked about this before, then if they say something hurtful, we don't retract in fear and anger or judgment. We then recognize, ooh, okay, that's something within me. And then it's about working together. It isn't about projecting. Sometimes we project that everybody else needs help and we aren't the ones that need to focus on ourselves. So we are also then able to see things from a more expansive perspective, which allows us to be of broader, higher, more service. And if that's, and I'm just using that as an example because from my perspective, we are helping others when we help ourselves. Because when we walk into a room and we're holding a frequency of neutrality and we're expanding our space out, everybody's affected. Everybody is then either going to meet our vibration, match our vibration. We might trigger them. It ripples out. So it's literally coming from that place of coherence. And I didn't really talk about that in my last video. I was just being very basic from one linear perspective. Now we're kind of going into a bigger perspective. But speaking of linear, so I wanted to talk a little bit about all of these triggers because oftentimes we're in that space of compassion and neutrality, and then a family member falls ill. And then when they fall ill, we have to then help them. We don't have to, but we choose to. And we help them, and while we're going through that process, we get pulled out of our neutral space because we go into a place of fear. Maybe we're angry over the fact that they didn't take care of themselves. Maybe we get into judgment about them judging us. Maybe it could go, it's on and on. So it's about recognizing, right, that we're being triggered. That is the I said that was the most important thing, but really it's coherence. I've talked about that so many times, that's just a given. But it's recognizing that we are being triggered. And sometimes we're triggered by a memory. Sometimes it's a conversation. It can be television. It can be we wake up at 2 in the morning and we have a thought. So the key is to recognize it in any of those things and not keep going back for more and going back for more, because then that becomes a loop and it becomes sometimes an addiction. And that's, again, something we could go off on a whole other tangent. I talked a little bit about the layers going up the ladder, changing the frequency and vibration so that we can recognize that it wasn't necessarily that that person was what was going on that triggered us. It might be that it was our own insecurity about being rejected, for example, and that person triggered a feeling of rejection in us, and it had nothing to do with them. It had to do with us. And when we see that from a higher perspective, we then don't project our own insecurities onto them and get into that loop, if that makes sense. Okay. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the physical body, because as we're going through this, we have a lot of symptoms. We are in the process of having like physical things happen to us. We feel a certain way. So these emotions come up, our mental, I talked earlier, I think about 0 point, it's connecting the right and left hemispheres of the brain. If we're constantly thinking and analyzing and figuring it out and solving the problem, we think we're integrating, when in actuality, we could be making it worse in the sense of prolonging it or going into a loop. We have to feel those emotions and allow them to just release. But if we're sucked into emotions and we're not even thinking about things and we're just reacting, that can be a hindrance as well. So it's about finding that balance, and I'll share at the end some tools. I think I'll do that. I'll share at the end some tools to get back into balance. So it starts with us. If we're worried about what's going on and in our social world, yet our children are doing poorly in school and aren't eating right, that is going, I said earlier in my last video, that's macro, meaning social and political, but that's actually not macro. Macro is like the universe, cosmos, and all of that. But I'm going to use this as an example of micro to macro. So micro is us, is our body, our cells, our organs, our body, or actually our auric system, our chakras, just for this video. Then you expand out from physical, and it's our relationships, right? With our children, I think would be the closest, especially if you have young children. And then I would say parents, siblings or family. Then it expands out to friends. It can also be a spouse in among the children, spouse, parents, that's also family. Then this spreads out into friends, and then out into work, and then out into social. I kind of did that here. I wrote this down from here: family, political, on up. So if we are being triggered constantly by what's going on in politics, and we're paying attention to our body, but we're not paying attention to our children, that's part of this. We're not in neutral 0 point, because we're looking so far in the future, even though it's happening now from our viewpoint. It's not happening here. We have to focus on here, because then we can see what's going on in the political landscape, the social and economic landscape from a higher perspective, and then we don't get sucked into the debris field that's going on right now. Because remember, everything is splat in our face, but we can choose to pick and choose what we're integrating and what we're reacting to, how we're reacting to things. And so our home, our heart, our body, are we drinking water? Are we eating the right foods? Do we have a relationship with our food? What kind of relationship do we have? Do we have a good, clear relationship with our children, who are also processing, integrating, and feeling? And then moving out, and I want to just touch briefly on that, because if our children are grown, or our parents, we don't have a relationship with them. If someone is in a place where they are constantly choosing and making choices over and over again that are causing us harm, like physical, or they're just mean, we have the choice to not interact with them, even if they are our family. And I want to just put that out there. What I'm referring to right now is, if you're married to someone and you want to make it work, but you're so focused on politics and you're so focused on the dramas that are playing out on television, then that relationship is suffering. Especially if your spouse isn't into it. You have to get back inside. If we're in our heart and we're in a place of coherence, we're going to recognize right away that we're not giving our spouse any attention, or that we've been playing video games for 5 days to escape from reality. Like, I could go into so many different rabbit holes here. But again, it is, if we're here, we're breathing, we're going to unplug, and we're going to see, oh, I need to spend some time with my wife, my husband, my children, right? And vice versa. You might be doting so much on your children that you forgot to take a shower for 3 days. I don't know. I'm just sharing. It's all, again, acknowledging it. Don't beat yourself up over it. Wow, I just did that. That really, okay, bring it in, rein it in. Take a deep breath, and we'll go over at the end some tools, as long as I don't run out of time. So that's the layer. That's the ladder, right? Starting in and then expanding out. And so all the stuff that's going on in our debris field, certain things are bigger debris than others. And we are being invited to recognize from an observer standpoint, from a place of harmony. That way we don't project into our decisions, I mentioned this before, about what we're seeing outside of us. And we might go, well, we really need to make some decisions about this. That might be true, but we are not making the most appropriate decisions if we are not in our highest vibration of expansiveness and coherence. We might be making a decision about a political party, about a social structure, about a work decision from a place of fear, from a place of anger, from a place of abandonment. Fill in the blanks. And I talked a little bit about living in the past or living in the future. That isn't a place of coherence. All we have to do is get into a place of balance, and then we recognize, well, I can't necessarily change the past, although I feel that you can, but we'll just say for this perspective, but I can change how I react to it, or I can integrate my feelings about things that I did, and I can release that shame that I feel. And allow myself to unfold, and boom, you're back in coherent space. Physical symptoms. So we are oftentimes experiencing physical symptoms, and I could do a whole video on that. I think I have. There are plenty of people that talk about ascension symptoms. That can also pull us out of neutral. That can pull us out of our center of gravity, so to speak, and pull us into a story. So what stories are we being pulled into? Is it our own story? What stories do we want to create? And again, it's coming back to harmony. If I'm experiencing physical pain, and I want to just share on a personal scale, I think I've had every ascension symptom that you could possibly have over the last 3 years. Maybe my whole life, I don't know. But I will share that that was my story for a while. And now I look back on it and I think, wow, I acknowledge that that's where I was from a non-judgmental space. And I am honoring that experience because that has allowed me to assist others in their journey, but also to integrate in my own way. So honor our bodies. Our bodies are going through some massive changes. This will affect our emotional and mental state. And I'm going to talk briefly, and I'm going to go into parasites. So I'm just going to take it down another rabbit hole for just a moment. My friend Kat and I were talking about this the other day, and Kat was bringing up heavy metals and toxins. And I thought, ooh, this is synchronistic, because many people are waking up at 2 a.m. and they're having ascension symptoms. And I'm not even going to label it as that, because that may not be what it is. They're having an immediate feeling, I need to process this. Their body is going through change, or sometimes we have parasites in our gut or heavy metals and high toxicity in our body, and our body then responds to that. Those parasites and heavy metals can trigger, and this video is about triggers, mental and emotional instability, which I don't say that with judgment. Instability means we're not in 0 point. We're not in neutrality. So it pulls us out of a place we might have thought we were fine. Sometimes that's what it is. It may be that we're only a little upset over something, and then this parasite comes out and it causes the wiring literally in our body to create a feeling of flight or fight response. Parasites and heavy metals directly affect our coherence because they directly affect our So what happens is, sorry, I had to pause that real quick. What happens is we have a fight or flight response, and cortisol goes up in our body. So without going into a whole video on this, I did a